The air in the rooftop lounge didn't just feel expensive, it felt lethal. Kang Jae-Min was halfway through a bottle of $10,000 crystal, and he was bored, which, for a man with a black tiger tattooed on his neck, was a state of being that usually ended in a crime scene. He didn't look at the woman standing before him as a human being. To him, Amara was just a prop in a white shirt and black vest, a piece of furniture with a pulse, hired to keep his glass full. He leaned back, a cold, mocking smirk playing on his lips as he pointed a finger at her, laughing loudly to his associates in sharp, staccato Korean. "Look at this one," he jeered, his voice cutting through the jazz music like a blade. "She stands there with those wide eyes, probably doesn't know a one from a dollar. They hire anyone these days. It's a pity. She has the face of a queen but the brain of a servant." The dining room went bone dry. The manager, standing by the mahogany pillars, began to sweat through his tailored suit. One wrong move, one audible breath, and Jae-Min would burn the building's reputation to the ground. But Amara didn't flinch. Her brown eyes remained calm, deep pools of hidden intelligence. She didn't apologize in English. She didn't beg for his favor. She simply tightened her grip on her order notepad, watching the digital countdown of a betrayal he was too arrogant to see coming. Amara's hands remained steady as she refilled a water glass at a neighboring table, but her mind was miles away, navigating the crowded, neon-lit alleys of Hongdae and the quiet, book-lined halls of Seoul National University. To the men at table 7, she was a silent shadow in a starched white shirt, but her silence was a choice, not an absence of thought. Behind her dark, expressive eyes lay the remnants of a life that felt like a different incarnation, one of academic journals, late-night research into Middle Korean phonology, and the grueling, exhilarating years she had spent submerged in Korean culture. She had earned her master in East Asian Linguistics through sheer, unyielding brilliance, becoming a scholar who could untangle the most complex honorifics and regional dialects with the precision of a surgeon. Yet the ivory tower had proved to be a fragile fortress. Upon her return, she found that her fieldwork credentials and high-level publications were viewed as curiosities rather than assets by local firms. Interviewers would look at her resume, then at her brown skin, and ask if she was truly the author of the papers on archaic syntax. The job market was a sea of closed doors and polite rejections that translated to a single, painful reality. Her intellect was a luxury the world wasn't ready to pay for. The mounting weight of student loans and the reality of an empty refrigerator eventually forced her into the black vest and bow tie of Belmont House. Now, instead of translating ancient texts, she translated the desires of the elite into orders for the kitchen, her degree tucked away in her apron pocket like a secret that had begun to taste like ash. She had become an expert in the art of the disappear, moving with a slim, graceful strength that allowed her to be present without being noticed. As she moved back toward Jae-Min's table, she felt the familiar sting of his dismissive laughter. He was still mocking her simple life to his associates, unaware that the woman he was treating like an illiterate servant was currently analyzing the structural flaws in his translator's grammar. Amara felt the old spark of the scholar stir beneath her professional mask. She wasn't just a waitress struggling to pay rent. She was a linguist watching a high-stakes deception unfold in a language she had mastered, while Jae-Min was still just a name in the tabloids. The hesitation that usually kept her safe began to war with a growing, cold clarity. She knew exactly what the rival syndicate was whispering, and for the first time in months, her education didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a weapon. The heavy brass doors of the VIP suite swung open, and the air in the room instantly curdled with a new, sharper kind of tension. The rival syndicate didn't arrive with the loud bravado of Jae-Min's crew. They entered with a predatory silence, led by a man whose movements were as surgical as the contract he carried. As the two groups converged at the Tiger's table, the atmosphere at Belmont House shifted from an upscale dinner to a high-stakes battlefield. Amara moved through the periphery, her footsteps light and controlled, feeling the weight of Jae-Min's presence, a man who controlled vast networks with a single, cold gaze. Jae-Min sat with a straight, disciplined posture, his broad shoulders casting a shadow over the fine linen tablecloth. He offered a slow, mocking smile to the newcomers, his narrow eyes showing a flicker of the arrogance that had already led him to humiliate Amara. To him, this was a moment of dominance, a routine expansion of his empire. He signaled for more wine without looking up, his hand dismissively waving toward Amara as if she were a mere extension of the mahogany furniture. The rival leader sat across from him, flanked by an older gentleman in wire-rimmed glasses who clutched a leather portfolio like a holy relic. Between them sat the translator, a man who acted as the only bridge of communication, and the only person in the room besides Amara who understood the true gravity of the words being exchanged. As the formal greetings began, the low hum of Korean dialogue filled the space, a rhythmic exchange of honorifics that masked a jagged undercurrent of deceit. Amara hovered just near enough to catch the nuances of their speech, her linguistic training locking onto the specific Seoul Street dialect the rivals used when they leaned in close to one another. She watched the translator's lips move, nodding the tiny, calculated pauses as he began to filter the rivals' aggressive terms into safe English for Jae-Min. The room was a pressure cooker of hidden intent, and as the leather portfolio was unzipped, Amara realized the deal was nothing more than a funeral shroud being woven in real time. Jae-Min, trapped by his own belief that he was the most dangerous man in the room, was leaning into the blade. The clink of fine crystal and the low, rhythmic hum of a cello playing in the background provided a deceptive layer of elegance to the room. But for Amara, the air was vibrating with the frequency of a lie. As she moved toward the tiger's table to refresh the sparkling water, she adjusted her pace, becoming the very ghost her manager demanded she be. Her proximity allowed her to tune out the ambient noise of the restaurant and focus entirely on the hushed, rapid-fire Korean being exchanged between the rival leader and his wire-rimmed translator. The rival leader leaned in, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper that would have been unintelligible to anyone without Amara's specific training in Gyeongsangdo regional dialects. "Tell the arrogant fool the maritime routes are included in the 50-50 split," the man muttered in Korean, a sharp contrast to the polite smile he offered Jae-Min. "But ensure the English contract he's holding only mentions the warehouse leases. Once his signature is on that paper, the routes belong to us, and his ports will be seized by the authorities by dawn. He'll be a king without a kingdom before he finishes his dessert." Amara felt a cold shiver trace the line of her spine. This wasn't just a lopsided business deal, it was a digital age execution. She watched the translator nod subtly, his eyes darting toward Jae-Min to ensure the boss was still distracted by his own sense of victory. Jae-Min sat back, his thumb tracing the small black tiger on his neck, looking every bit the dominant predator. He was laughing again, a short, mocking sound directed at the rival's generosity, completely unaware that the man across from him was currently handing him a noose disguised as a fountain pen. The translator cleared his throat and began to speak in English, his voice smooth and reassuring. "Mr. Kang, my client is prepared to offer a full 50% stake in all primary shipping routes as a gesture of goodwill," he lied, his eyes never leaving the leather portfolio. Amara's hand trembled slightly as she tipped the pitcher. The gap between the spoken Korean and the translated English was a chasm that would swallow Jae-Min whole. She stood at the precipice of a choice: remain the invisible scholar in the shadows, or step into the light and risk the fury of the most dangerous man in the city. The dining room had become a stage where every player was reciting a script, but only Amara could see the trapdoors opening beneath their feet. The translator adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, his voice taking on a tone of practiced sincerity as he began the formal readout of the English contract. To Jae-Min, the words sounded like a total surrender, a lucrative expansion of his territory that would cement his dominance over the city's northern docks. "As stated in Clause 4.2, the translator lied smoothly, his finger tracing a line of text that actually detailed the immediate seizure of Jae-Min's offshore assets. "All logistical hubs currently under your management will remain autonomous, with the rival syndicate providing only security and overhead support." Amara stood just 3 feet away, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She watched Jae-Min lean forward, his expression one of calm, slightly arrogant satisfaction. He was a man who prided himself on his discipline and his ability to read people, yet his own prejudice was acting as a blindfold. Because he viewed Amara as a simple waitress with the brain of a servant, he never imagined the woman refilling his glass was mentally translating the legal jargon he was about to sign away. The rival leader offered a slow, deferential nod, a masterclass in performative submission. He spoke again in that low, guttural Korean dialect, his words dripping with venom that the translator carefully scrubbed away before presenting it to Jae-Min. "The ink is ready, Mr. Kang," the translator urged, sliding a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen across the table. The light from the chandelier caught the sharp edges of Jae-Min's jawline and the dark ink of the tiger on his neck as he reached for the pen. Amara's breath hitched. In the English version the translator was reciting, Jae-Min was becoming a partner. In the Korean reality she had just overheard, he was signing his own death warrant. The twisted tongue of the man in the glasses was weaving a web of peace and profit, while the true contract remained a silent, lethal blade. The golden fountain pen felt heavy as Kang Jae-Min's fingers closed around it, the metal gleaming like a polished tooth under the VIP lights. The rival leader watched with a predatory stillness, his fake smile never reaching his eyes as he waited for the tiger to sign away his kingdom. For Amara, the next few seconds stretched into an eternity. She stood frozen at the edge of the table, the weight of the water pitcher in her hand anchoring her to a life of service that suddenly felt like a prison. She looked at Jae-Min, the man who had mocked her intelligence in a language he thought she couldn't understand, and felt a flash of resentment. Why should she save him? If she remained silent, she would be safe. She could walk away from the table, finish her shift, and remain the invisible waitress the world expected her to be. Jae-Min's arrogance had made him blind, and the rival syndicate was simply exploitation of that blindness. But then her eyes moved to the translator, who was watching the pen nib touch the paper with a look of greedy anticipation. It wasn't just about Jae-Min, it was about the lie. Her entire academic career, her years of study in Seoul, and her love for linguistics were rooted in the pursuit of truth and the power of communication. To stand by, while language was used as a weapon of betrayal, felt like a deeper humiliation than any insult Jae-Min could hurl. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her that her education was a tool she carried everywhere, even into a dining room where she was treated like a ghost. The hesitation that had kept her safe for 3 months began to crumble, replaced by a cold, academic clarity. She realized that her invisibility was actually her greatest advantage. She was the only person in the room who truly knew the stakes. Jae-Min's hand moved to begin the first stroke of his name. The oxygen seemed to leave the room as the rival boss leaned forward, his heartbeat almost audible in the sudden silence. Amara's internal war ended in a heartbeat. She wouldn't let him sign it, not because she owed him loyalty, but because she refused to let her silence be the final word. The silence in the room was so absolute it felt physical, broken only by the microscopic scuff of the gold nib against the grain of the contract. Kang Jae-Min's hand was steady, his eyes fixed on the line where he would sign away his future. Across from him, the rival leader's pupils dilated, his breath hitching in anticipation of the killing blow. Amara didn't think, she moved. Her hand, gloved and professional, shot forward and pressed firmly against the center of the leather portfolio, pinning the paper to the table just as the first ink stroke began. The motion was so sudden, so contrary to the invisible role she played, that the entire table recoiled as if she had brandished a weapon. Jae-Min froze. He looked up, his narrow eyes widening with a cold, lethal confusion. The mocking smirk was gone, replaced by the terrifying stillness of a predator interrupted. "What are you doing?" he hissed in English. His voice, a low vibration of impending violence. Amara didn't flinch. She met his gaze, her dark eyes no longer deferential but burning with a fierce, academic authority. She didn't speak the broken English he expected. Instead, she drew a breath and spoke in a voice that was melodic, precise, and layered with the high honorifics of the Seoul elite. "Sajangnim Josonghamnida," she began, her Korean flawless and sharp. "If you put your seal on this document, you are not signing a merger. You are signing a confession of bankruptcy, and a transfer of your life's work to a man who intends to see you in a cell by daybreak. The effect was instantaneous. The rival leader's face drained of color, turning a sickly shade of gray. The translator's jaw dropped, his wire-rimmed glasses sliding down his nose as he stared at the waitress he had spent the last hour insulting. Jae-Min didn't move. He sat perfectly still, the fountain pen still gripped in his hand, his gaze locked on Amara as if he were seeing a ghost. The simple girl with the brain of a servant had just spoken to him in the dialect of his own inner circle, exposing a conspiracy that his most trusted advisors had missed. The power dynamic in the room didn't just shift, it shattered. The glass-walled VIP suite, once a trap for Jae-Min, had suddenly become a cage for the men across the table. "Repeat that," Jae-Min commanded, his voice now a low, dangerous purr. "And tell me exactly what Clause 4.2 says, in the language they thought you couldn't understand." Amara stood tall, her apron no longer a symbol of servitude but a scholar's robes. She began to translate, her voice unwavering as she tore the deception apart, word by lethal word. The room was a tomb of paralyzed silence, the only sound the frantic, shallow breathing of the translator. Kang Jae-Min didn't look at the cowering men across from him. His cold, narrow eyes remained fixed on Amara, searching her face for a hint of deception or fear. He saw neither. Instead, he found the steady, unwavering gaze of a woman who had spent years mastering the very nuances they had used as a shroud. Jae-Min slowly set the gold fountain pen down, the click of the metal against the marble tabletop sounding like a gunshot. "You say you studied in Seoul," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous purr that vibrated with a new kind of curiosity. "Prove it. Look at page 12, the subclause regarding cultural heritage assets. The English version says it protects my family's estate. Tell me what the Korean text truly says." Amara didn't hesitate. She reached out, her slim fingers flipping the heavy vellum pages with a practiced grace that spoke of hours spent in university archives. She found the section, her eyes scanning the dense, archaic terminology that the rival syndicate had hidden deep within the legal jargon. "This is not a protection clause, Sajangnim," Amara said, her voice resonant and clear. "They have used a classical Buddhist legal term, Beopjayo, to describe your estate. In the context of this contract, it translates to relinquished temple grounds. By signing this, you aren't protecting your family home. You are legally classifying it as abandoned property, allowing the syndicate to seize it under government eminent domain laws by tomorrow afternoon." A collective gasp escaped the security detail flanking the table. The rival leader's face transitioned from gray to a ghostly white, his hand trembling as he reached for his water glass, only to knock it over. The spilled liquid seeped across the tablecloth, soaking into the edges of the fraudulent contract. Jae-Min leaned forward, his sharp features illuminated by the overhead chandelier, highlighting the black tiger tattoo on his neck. For the first time, the tiger looked at the waitress and didn't see a servant. He saw a strategist who had just dismantled a multi-million-dollar assassination of his empire with a single paragraph of translation. "They thought your low status made you a blind spot," Jae-Min whispered, a slow, mocking smile, this time directed at his enemies, spreading across his face. "But it seems you were the only one in this room who was actually awake." The atmosphere in the VIP suite, once thick with the smug arrogance of the rival syndicate, turned glacial. Kang Jae-Min stood up slowly, his tall, imposing frame casting a long shadow over the table. The calm, dangerous aura that usually commanded the room now felt like a physical weight, pressing down on the men who had dared to plot his ruin. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His silence was more terrifying than any threat. He looked at the translator, whose wire-rimmed glasses were fogged with the sweat of pure terror. "You were my voice," Jae-Min said, his tone a low, melodic purr that promised a violent end. "And you used it to weave a shroud for me." With a flick of his wrist, Jae-Min signaled his security team. The men, carved from granite and bad intentions, moved with lethal efficiency, seizing the translator and the rival leader before they could even stammer an apology. The golden fountain pen, which had nearly been the instrument of his downfall, lay abandoned on the soaked tablecloth. Jae-Min turned his gaze back to Amara. The mockery that had defined his earlier expression was entirely gone, replaced by a sharp, intense observation. He reached out and picked up the leather portfolio, ripping the fraudulent contract in half with a single, decisive motion. "You have a master's degree in linguistics, and you're carrying a water pitcher," Jae-Min asked, his narrow eyes searching hers as if seeing her for the very first time. Amara stood her ground, her slim but strong build reflecting the quiet confidence that had finally broken through her mask of service. "I was a ghost because the world preferred me invisible, Sajangnim," she replied, her Korean still perfect, still fearless. "But even a ghost hears everything." Jae-Min let out a short, dry laugh, not of mockery, but of genuine, shocked amusement. He looked at the tiger tattoo on his wrist, then back at her. The power dynamic had not just shifted, it had been completely rebuilt. The woman he had humiliated was now the only person in the city he could trust with the truth. "Mr. Henderson," Jae-Min barked toward the shadows where the manager was cowering. "Close the restaurant. Miss Bennett is finished with her shift. From this moment on, she is no longer on your payroll. She's on mine." The penthouse was silent now, the violent energy of the previous hour replaced by the cool, nocturnal hum of the city lights below. Mr. Henderson had long since cleared the staff, his face a pale mask of disbelief as he watched the woman he'd treated as invisible stand as an equal to the man who controlled the docks. Kang Jae-Min sat at the head of the table, his tailored black Italian suit reflecting the dim, amber glow of the chandeliers. He wasn't looking at the shattered remains of the contract. He was looking at Amara. "In my world, silence is usually a sign of weakness," Jae-Min said, his voice now devoid of the mocking edge that had defined their first encounter. He gestured to the chair directly across from him, the seat previously occupied by a man who was now being dealt with in the shadows. "But your silence was a strategic reserve. You allowed me to be the fool so you could see the truth." Amara didn't hesitate. She reached back and untied the strings of her black apron, letting the heavy fabric fall to the floor like a shed skin. Beneath it, her white button-up shirt and black vest no longer looked like a uniform. They looked like the minimalist attire of a high-level operative. She pulled out the chair and sat, her graceful, controlled movements mirroring his own discipline. "I didn't let you be a fool, Sajangnim," she said, her dark eyes meeting his narrow, observant gaze with total fearlessness. "I waited until the price of your arrogance was high enough for you to actually listen." Jae-Min gave a slow, respectful nod. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a new leather portfolio, one containing his actual, legitimate interests. He slid it toward her. "The translator is gone. My inner circle has been pruned. I need someone who doesn't just speak the language, but understands the subtext of a betrayal before the blade is drawn." Amara looked at the documents, then back at the man with the black tiger on his neck. The underdog scenario she had lived for months had reached its final transformation. She was no longer a linguist without a job or a waitress with a hidden degree. She was the strategist for the most powerful man in the city. "My rates are significantly higher than the tips at Belmont House," she said, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. Jae-Min's expression softened into one of genuine amusement as he leaned back, his broad shoulders relaxing for the first time all night. "Consider the bill paid, Amara. Let's get to work."